Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. Here we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right, another week, and the 100th NFL season has ended as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 228. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I catch up with a longtime friend, a guy that I'm very happy to call a friend, and that's Charles Davis. You may know him as the voice of Madden NFL, the franchise, the video game franchise. You may know him for his work on Sundays, Fox Sports, with what he does covering NFL games. You may know him from NFL Network during the offseason, where he covers the NFL draft. Charles Davis and I caught up a few weeks back at the East-West Shrine Bowl. We talked about a few different things. It was just kind of talking turkey about the business, about the Eagles, what they did this season. We talked a little bit about that. Then we talked about franchise quarterbacks. What do they look like? What do they feel like? What do they sound like? How do they compose themselves in private? That's one thing, and I think Charles kind of offers a little bit of a different vantage point that maybe most of us aren't really aware of. So Charles gets a little bit into that. And then we talked about the draft process, how teams are trying to unveil those diamonds in the rough this time of the year. So we'll cover all of that with Charles Davis at the top of the show in Chalk Talk. After that, I'm going to go through my notes, just a couple of things. There are three big takeaways for me coming out of Super Bowl 54. Watched the game Sunday night, obviously. Got through the film on Tuesday morning, so excited to kind of reveal some of the takeaways for me from that matchup. Really happy to see Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs come away with that win. Obviously, we got friends on both sides of the coin there and with both franchises, but really excited for Andy Reid and all the coaches that were there, all the people that are now in Kansas City that were previously here in Philadelphia. All right. Before we get into the rest of the show, I want to thank everybody that had the opportunity, had the chance, that took the time to really just go and fill out that survey on this Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Just really help us out. Over the last month, we had that survey open. Next week, we're going to open one for the Journey to the Draft podcast with the same goal in mind. We're just trying to make that show better, trying to figure out ways, what do you guys like listening to, what don't you like listening to. We covered all that in the Eagle Eye in the Sky survey. We'll be doing that on the Journey to the Draft survey. If you're not already, go subscribe to the Journey to the Draft podcast. Every single week, we're covering all the action leading up to April's NFL draft. We have it year-round, so we're talking college football, what guys are rising, who's helping their stock. A lot of fun. Really appreciate everybody that subscribes to that show as well. All right, let's get to the top here. It's time to check in with Charles Davis. Speaking of the NFL draft, Charles does a great job for NFL Network this time of year. We caught up with him down in Senior Bowl. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
We're really excited to welcome into the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Longtime friend of the show. First time you've ever been on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Charles Davis from NFL Network, from Fox Sports. You did 2-3 Eagles games this year?
I think we had three, right? Because
yeah,
I think
so.
we started with the season opener.
You did,
with
yep.
Washington.
Yep.
Then we had on the road at Minnesota.
You had Minnesota.
And then we had Seattle.
Correct.
We had the Seattle regular season game.
That's right, yep.
So, yeah, three times, and that's pretty cool for me. It's always great to visit Philadelphia.
Sure.
But it's always great to work with the Philadelphia organization. So for us and our crew, not telling any tales out of school, that counts a lot.
Sure.
When you're going to do a game, when you're working with good organizations, good people, people who get it the way that we hope that that we get it. We certainly hope that. It works out pretty well, and Philly's one of those.
Yeah, I think fans don't really know what goes into the production for you guys from the meeting standpoint, without giving us too much out of school. What happens in those production meetings leading up? How many guys do you typically talk with leading up to the game?
Yeah, every crew's different. As you know, Fran, you've seen them all come through from all the networks, right? Yeah. You got the NBC, you've got the ESPN Monday night, you've got the CBS crews, our crews at Fox, right on down the line. And everyone does a little bit differently. Our crew is basically this. We want to talk with the head coach. We want to talk with the coordinators. Now, if the head coach calls plays on one side of the ball or the other, we typically eliminate that coordinator.
Got it. Okay.
And then we want to talk with the starting quarterback and usually one defender.
Got it.
That's basically it for us.
Yeah.
Occasionally we'll add an extra guy in. Like this year we added in Zach Ertz for one meeting, as an extra person because of the World Cup and his wife Julie.
Makes sense.
And
Yep.
Fox
Right.
carried the World Cup, so we
Okay.
thought there was a natural tie-in.
Makes
But
sense
typically we do that to try and keep it limited, keep it small, and not upset guys because, Fran, you can tell everyone on Fridays when practice is over,
Yep.
that's personal time for everyone.
That's
They're
right.
going to get their hair cut. They're going to the bank. They're going to take care of business. They're going to spend time with their families. And if you stack them up like kindling outside the room and make them wait, they're not going to be happy when they get in anyway. So we try and keep it limited.
No question. And the personalities get a little bit prickly on Fridays, trying to see.
Yeah,
we know it from our
because they're
side,
starting to
from
feel
Bucks'
it.
side,
They're
yep.
starting to feel getting ready for the game. So we try to be respectful that way. I'm not saying our way is the right way.
Sure.
That's just the way we do it.
So you got to see this team, obviously Seattle. After that Seattle loss, they had the Miami loss after that, and then they kind of turned the corner. There were a bunch of injuries to this team. From the outside looking in, what was your feeling on this Eagles team in 2019 and just kind of the journey that they went on?
Well, actually, let's just take it from the end of it and work our way back.
Okay, yep.
Admiration.
Yeah.
Because, as you noted, we saw them against Seattle, and they played really hard that day. What would they have, 5 turnovers?
Yeah, 4 or 5 turnovers.
Five
It was an
turnovers.
ugly
It
performance.
was just an ugly game.
Yep.
But even that being said, Seattle couldn't flat out kill you.
Yeah.
17-9, which
Yep.
turned out to be the same score in the playoffs.
He needed a trick play touchdown.
Trick
They
play
had another
touchdown.
long run for a touchdown, uncharacteristic of the Eagles D. Yep.
But offensively, just could never quite get in sync.
Yep.
Didn't have the receivers. I think that was Greg Ward's first game
That's
coming up
correct.
from the
Yep.
practice
J.J.
squad.
Arthur-Whiteside's first real action.
Right, first real action. So there's a lot going on. Carson having to deal with a lot of things. So the admiration was watching essentially that lineup
Yep.
and an offensive line that kept having to move things around because guys were either hurt or you had to change positions.
Sure.
Watching all that happen, that was a big deal. To see them win those last 4, I mean,
awesome.
when no one really thought that could possibly happen, and to know that Alshon Jeffrey's not playing, Deshaun Jackson's not playing, Nelson Aguilar's not playing, Zach Ertz is playing hurt
Yeah.
before he couldn't play anymore. That was off the charts to see that. Now, go back to the beginning of the season when you beat Washington in the season opener. That roster looked, and I hate to do revisionist history, so I'm not going to, that roster looked like it had a chance to be a Super Bowl team.
Yep.
That's what it felt like. And then with Deshaun going off in the first game, and now here Carson can get the deep ball going because that had been the criticism. He can't
Yep.
throw the deep ball. Well, you got the guy who can go get the deep ball. Guess
Yep.
what? It worked pretty well then.
250-plus yard touchdowns in that game. Yep.
And that second half for Carson, I said, okay, this is, and that's when you thought they had it, and then the injuries happen, and you get the idea. It's such an up and down year. But the way that they finished just spoke volumes again about this organization, about Doug Peterson as a head coach, about that team and locker room keeping it together because they could have gone south so easily.
I feel like there's a lot of sayings out there, a lot of things that people kind of throw and say, like, you know what, this is gospel. And one of those things at quarterback is, you know what, a franchise quarterback, he's got to make the people around him better. And that was a thing that people question, especially at that point after that Seattle game, after the Miami game, was, well, I don't know if Carson Wentz has it. Like, can he make these guys better? Can he make that 4-game stretch? I feel like kind of like took that argument and threw it out the window in a big way.
Fran, I think you make a really good point, and amongst people I talked with, that was a big topic of conversation because everyone's very careful about, can that quarterback do this, do that? Well, is it all the quarterback's responsibility?
Yeah.
But those last 4 games, when now you're throwing to, help me out with names here, Greg Ward. Now you're throwing to Deontay Burnett.
Robert Davis.
Now tight end, you're bringing in
Josh Perkins.
Josh Perkins is coming up to play. Goddard and Ertz were kind of staples until Ertz got dinged up. But that's not Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, and Nelson Aguilar. So you can't help but make the case that Carson Wentz helped elevate that team. And in a lot of ways, I thought it was kind of a freeing experience for Carson.
Sure.
Because let's be honest about it. If you didn't get to the playoffs, no one would have been surprised.
Right. Yep.
But for him to elevate that team, for them to play as well as they did, and let's not take away credit from those guys stepping up and playing well down the stretch, but it all coalesced and came together. That was a big, big deal. Because now, when you look at the guys who are the frontline guys, of course you want them back. They are really good players. But at the same time, other people stepped up and made those plays, and Carson could be, in a lot of ways, Carson again.
Yeah.
I thought that was a big deal for him. And I think you'll get a different Carson Wentz going forward. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean that in like he's going to carry himself differently. But I think all the stuff that happened before, Fran, a lot of that's going to go away for him now.
Right.
Because he's seen, hold on a second, I am what I thought I was. I'm not bad at this thing, and guys respond to me.
I feel like you have guys that kind of go through those different levels of maturation, and at some point for a quarterback, it becomes, I think back to almost like Tom Brady early on, the early championships with Brady. You had the defense, you had the run game, you had guys there kind of around him, and he was a compliment. And then at some point, it flipped, and now it's Brady's show. Russell, now you look at Seattle now. That used to be Marshawn Lynch and Legion of Boom. Now it's Russell Wilson's show. I feel like that's kind of that stage we're at now with Carson. He got the contract last year. We saw him kind of take the bull by the horns in this year's the end of the season. Now it feels like, okay, moving forward, this is his squad.
I think that's a great point. I love the analogies on it. And the only thing I'll add to it is now he has put some things up on the wall that guys have to respect.
Yep.
So all this conversation of this bubbling of someone saying something in the locker room and someone's doing this, did you see how things finished?
Right.
It changes the perception of him, because if that person had other people's ears, they're kind of like, yeah, but hold up a second, look what we did here.
Sure.
That helps Carson Wentz in a big way. And you're right, the transition starts to really occur.
You talk with quarterbacks. You mentioned you talk with quarterbacks every single week, and you've seen the best of the best. How does it look? How does it feel? Like all those guys have looks and feels, and you see guys that aren't working or that are not playing well or don't have that command of that team. Is there a certain template that all those guys kind of work off of, and where that this looks the part of a franchise guy?
Yeah, every guy obviously is his own person. He does it to his own personality. But there's an ease about how they come into the meeting room when you know that he's the guy.
Right.
That person comes into the room, and I'm not going to throw all their names out because you know who they are by watching them play. But they come into the room, they know how it works. It's going to work the way they want it to work without being heavy-handed. And when they're done, and off you go. And that's one of the things that we try to take pride of in our group. Let's not keep them there forever. Let's not ask them a million questions. Let's talk to them, get a sense, a feel, and off you go. And for the most part, you can tell pretty easily by how they walk in, shake your hand, and sit down and ready to go. The bottom line is they're all pros.
Right.
Like that professionalism comes out. The ones that are still trying to make it might not be quite as professional. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They might not quite know what to do yet.
Sure.
But they're trying to figure that part out.
And that's why I wanted to ask you next, was that you have like that unique role where, with what you do at NFL Network, you work, at the Combine and the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, you meet these guys as they're coming out of college. Have you seen these guys that maybe they didn't have it early, and then that kind of develops, and you know what? Now this guy gets it.
Yeah.
Now where he needs to be.
Yeah, we have seen that. And some of it is the enthusiasm is just off the charts when we see them in these settings. You know, they're so excited. They want to be this and they want to be that. I remember someone told me years and years ago, and I think you and I grew up similar, Fran, with parents that were involved in this, right? That we could watch and be around. And someone told me years ago that in order to be at top of your profession, whether you're a head coach, an athletic director, whatever it was, it's usually a 3 to 5 year process, because you come into it thinking, I am these 5 things.
Yep.
And by the end of the 5th year, you may not be any of those 5 things, or you've refined them, or you figured out what's really important to you, and now you're solid in that. I think it's the same process with these young quarterbacks coming up. I think I'm supposed to act this way. I think I'm supposed to think this way. And then after a while, they're like, no, this is who I really am, and that sprouts, and that comes out.
Yeah, I always, in talking with fans, we're talking with listeners as well, like the human side of the game. All these guys are people, and so when we're in the middle of this draft process now, where the teams, they're trying to find out who these guys are. It's the film is in the book. Everyone knows what they are as players. Now it's, what are we getting as an employee? What are we getting as a teammate, as a locker room guy? What are we getting from that standpoint? Because very often that determines whether a guy is going to succeed or whether he's not going to.
And that is so hard to get to, isn't it, Fran?
Yeah.
Because the comedian Chris Rock did a routine once where he talked about relationships and he talked about marriages and said, you're really not marrying the person you think you're marrying, and they're not marrying the person they think they're marrying. They're marrying your representative.
Right.
Because you're on your toes, right? You're on your P's and Q's. You do everything perfectly. Anything they do is cute. This is wonderful because you're in love.
Right.
And then after you settle in for a while, that bothers me. Why didn't I think of this? What's that? And then you have to learn how to navigate that process.
Right.
You're still in love, but now how do you navigate those things that maybe now you don't have the same patience for as before? I think it's like that, watching these kids come out from this process, to see them come out. And for teams, that's why you're talking about how difficult that is, to get to really know them and know what you're getting, as opposed to, is this just a veneer that I'm getting here where he's been well-trained, well-coached, Here's how you answer. Here's what you get. That's the tough part for teams. That's why drafting such an inexact science. I mean, that's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Because you're not exactly. You think you're getting this, might not quite be that. Then you find that out later.
We're in the middle of. I mentioned we're in the middle of this draft process. What's your favorite part of this time of year?
My favorite part is going to these events, the All-Star games, whether it's the East-West, it's the Senior Bowl, going to the Combine, and starting to watch these kids develop and see if there's any consistency along the way.
Yep.
You know, I also love the kids coming from a little bit off the radar. You know,
Okay,
for
like
you,
that.
there is no off the radar.
I
You
would
know
that
all
there's
these
plenty,
kids.
There's plenty off the radar.
You know every one of them, and every year, you know, I'm calling you, going, Fran, who is this kid from such and such? And you're like, oh yeah, I watched 5 tapes of him last year. I'm like, what? I didn't even know where that school was. You're amazing. But that's part of what I like, because these kids are getting their opportunity on equal ground. We got kids coming here. We got a D3 kid here at the East-West, right, from Berry College in Georgia,
yeah.
right? We've got kids from, you know, the University of Rhode Island. We got a kid here from Army. We got a kid here from Navy. So they're not necessarily not household names, because Army and Navy people lock in on a little well. But how many people can name any kids from Rhode Island?
No,
right?
not many. Yep.
And one of them is playing really well. I'm not going to name who he is at this time, but he's coming along, and he's a receiver,
Right,
and he's doing a really nice job. But I like watching that happen. I like watching it develop, and I think the lesson gets hammered in every year, doesn't it, Fran? Doesn't matter where they come from. If they can play, they'll find
They're
them.
gonna find you.
And I don't know how it was for you, but you remember the year we were at the Senior Bowl, and Ali Marpet came from Hobart.
Hobart College.
And do you remember me coming to you and saying, "Hey, I got to ask Fran, this Marpet thing. So they're going to start doing a D3 kid every year?" And you said, "He actually can play."
He can play.
And I was like, "What?" I thought they were just doing a D3, like throwing him
right,
a bone
yeah.
and having like the D3 kid come and show up.
Sure.
And you were like, "No, actually." And I was like, "Really?" And sure enough, I came to you the next day and went, "Oh, yeah, I get it."
We saw it there.
And Ali Marpet was a starter day one in the NFL.
That's
and
right.
is never coming out of the lineup. So all of them don't work out that way.
Yeah.
But a good number of them do.
Yep.
And it's just like going to the Pro Bowl or seeing the AP team every year. How many lower level draft picks? How many guys weren't drafted? Turn themselves into players.
Yeah. So when I was at Temple for 5 years, and did a little bit with recruiting and like player evaluation and talking with players and families when they would come in for visits. And back then, Temple was in the MAC, and the selling point was, look, you can come in. We play Penn State. We play some of the bigger schools, because kids are worried, like, is the NFL going to find me? Over the last few years, like more and more and more. Forget all that stuff. Like you deal with high school kids and the recruiting part of it. Like you said it. If you have talent, the NFL. North Dakota State quarterback got taken second overall. Like
second overall.
I mean, like if you can play, they're going to find you. Rather than you see these kids now, and not to get too far down the line of like the transfer portal and things like that, where a guy goes somewhere and he transfers after 1 year. It's like, how in 12 months did this situation change so drastically? Like, find the right place for you personally. If you can play, like they're gonna make it work for you.
They're definitely going to make it work, and you know what it's like every week getting ready for a game when you look at the Eagles and who they're playing.
Right.
And you look at their roster, and you remember those guys when you scouted them and you evaluated them, and they are literally from all over.
All over the place.
Absolutely all over. Who was the D3? We had those D3 defensive backs.
Yep.
Marquis Christian.
It's a great one.
Right?
Love that.
Playing pretty well, right?
Yeah.
So every year I look and see who wins the Cliff Harris Award, which is for the best, D2, D3 defender, D3 NAIA defender in the country,
Sure,
right?
Yep.
They're all getting drafted.
Right.
Right?
It's a good projector.
The kid out of Dubuque
Yep.
who won it, he went to the Senior Bowl and
That's
acquitted
right.
himself well. I'm not sure he's made it quite as far in the league as he wanted to. The kid last year, I've lost his name
names
for
all
some reason,
shuffle out of
but
my
he
head.
gets drafted, and he actually was playing pretty well.
Yeah.
So I look at that every year and go, yeah, you're probably gonna get a pretty good player.
Yeah, it's an awesome part of the process, and just trying to find the diamonds in the rough and see who's going to project well to the NFL. Well, Charles, appreciate the time here on
thank
the Eagle
you.
Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. We'll be listening to you for sure over the next few months.
Well, like I tell everyone all the time, the mute button works just as fine. As long as you can see the picture out there, you're okay. Listen to my partners if I get on your nerves, but thank you.
Charles, thanks, man.
Great stuff from Charles, and you can follow him on Twitter just like I do at CFD22. And while you're at it, I'm at FDuffy3. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce at PhiladelphiaEagles.com. And you know how much I appreciate all of you that promote
this podcast on social media and all of our podcasts. But the best way to give us your support is to go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. It bumps us up the rankings a little bit, lets other people find the show. And I wanted to give a shout out to somebody who's done exactly that. And we're going to go this week to Scouts Doubt, who left a great question, a 5-star review, and he said, Fran, do you get the sense that the Eagles' offense was built to Carson Wentz's strengths to start the year? Then, with all the injuries, it was tough for him to adjust to a different style, and by the end of the year, he was able to learn how to play in that type of offense. I was also thinking that this may have been the reason why he seemed to struggle a little bit in 2018, while Nick Foles excelled, because that was more Nick Foles' style of play with those quick, shorter throws. And Scouts Doubt's a great question, and I think really when you look at how an offense looks, how really any team, not just offense, but defensively as well. When you've got all of your players, you're going to spend all offseason really kind of sculpting your game plan, right? You're going to try and say, okay, what is going to be our philosophy this year? How are we going to leverage the skill sets of all the guys we've got? If we're going to use the offensive example, we've got the speed of Deshaun Jackson. We've got the size of Alshon Jeffrey. We've got the route running from Nelson Agholor. We've got the dynamic playmaking ability with Miles Sanders and the hammer inside with Jordan Howard. We've got all these weapons, both tight ends with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. How are we going to get all these guys involved? And early on, you go back to that Washington game, watch how they attack downfield on 3rd and longs with Deshaun Jackson. And you could see throughout the course of the season, as guys started to get chipped away, that eats away at your game plan. Really, week 2 against Atlanta was just a really good microcosm of that, because you lose Deshaun Jackson, you lose Alshon Jeffrey right away, right off the bat. You lose Dallas Goedert. Now, your whole game plan kind of goes out the window, and you have to rethink things on the fly. And so I think that's really what you saw throughout the middle part of the season, is that the Eagles, the whole offense, they had to just kind of figure out, all right, what is our identity now? If you don't have Deshaun, if you don't have Nelson Agholor, who had to leave due to injury, you don't have Alshon Jeffrey anymore. How do you figure that out? He left due to injury. Jordan Howard left due to injury. You had offensive linemen stepping in and out. You had tight ends stepping in and out. We know by now, right? We talked about this earlier with Charles. All the injuries on that side of the ball, you kind of have to almost reinvent yourself at some point, and that's what it took. It took a little bit of time. You can go back and watch that first Seattle game that Charles and I were talking about earlier, and it was baby steps, right? They weren't quite on the same page. The quarterback and the receivers weren't together. That mind meld wasn't quite there yet. But as you started to get going and you got down the stretch, and you could see there were plenty of opportunities for us to be able to see, you know what? Compare apples to apples. Watch Greg Ward run this route, that first matchup against Seattle. Now watch him run it here in week 16 or week 17. Watch J.J. Arcega-Whiteside run this route here and then run it a little bit later. You could just kind of see that maturation, that growth between the quarterback and all of the receivers. And so, to me, that's really what you saw from this offense this year, with all the pieces that were rotated in and out or that they just lost. It just took a little bit of time to gel. But once you got to that point late down the stretch, that final month of the season, things really came together for Carson Wentz. The game planning, the play calling, everything kind of just came together really well for that group. And so, a lot of reasons to be excited moving forward into 2020, with Carson Wentz and all of these players that they've got around him on that offense. So excited to see how that group will continue to build moving into the offseason. Now let's get into the next part. And I told you at the top of the show, we would break down what I saw from the Super Bowl. And to me, I'm glad that I saved Charles's interview for this week, because we talked a little bit about the franchise quarterback, right? And what that guy looks like, what he feels like, what is his presence when he walks into those rooms and those production meetings. To me, when you look at this game between the Chiefs and the 49ers, you can kind of see what the difference is between having what you would call as your guy, your franchise, quote unquote, your franchise quarterback, and if you're still trying to figure out if you've got that franchise quarterback. You read the post game quotes from the San Francisco 49ers and from the Kansas City Chiefs. You see how the game plays out. San Francisco, obviously, a little bit more conservative down the stretch, right? They're trying to keep the ball away from Patrick Mahomes. Kyle Shanahan said after the game, hey, we were worried about that guy on the other sideline. We didn't want to give him the ball back and give them the opportunity to be able to come down the field and win it. Meanwhile, you say on the Kansas City side, those guys on defense, those guys on offense, they knew, hey, even though he didn't have a great first 3 quarters, they knew there was always that hope. There was always that feeling, hey, you know what? At any point, he can turn it on. And so you almost have that great juxtaposition there of the defense or the opposing team not wanting to give the ball back to your quarterback, and your own team saying, hey, you know what? I know it hasn't been great yet, but we've got that hope. We know that he's got that ability to go and take us down the field and win this game. And I think when you look at how both teams handled this matchup, it kind of points to say, Kansas City, they know what they've got in Patrick Mahomes. And I think that's the impact that a franchise quarterback, like a Patrick Mahomes, like a Carson Wentz, like what Lamar Jackson has turned into in Baltimore. Obviously, we know all the names throughout the course of NFL history. You know, you go back to Tom Brady and Drew Brees and Peyton Manning. When you have that guy, that's what he can be for your team. It's not always just about what he can do with his arm or with his legs. It's about just the feel of a game and how the strategy, the X's and O's go behind that and beyond that. So I thought that was my first takeaway. Second, staying with Kansas City's offense, I thought that they did a great job of attacking cover 3, just finding different ways to be able to attack those intermediate zones. Yeah, we saw the RPOs, we saw the option run game for sure, especially in key situations, whether it was Mahomes keeping it or pitching it out to a back. I thought that you saw that as well, but throughout the course of the game, they did a great job of really just attacking down the field. And they led on a number of those scoring drives, whether they were ended in field goals or touchdowns. You saw some big plays down the seam, down the sideline, just in those voids in cover 3. Those big completions I thought were really, really big. And a tip of the cap to that coaching staff. Obviously, we know in Philadelphia what Andy Reid is like off the week of rest. They certainly had some great plays dialed up. Certainly none bigger than that 3rd and 15 deep ball to Tyreek Hill to really kind of change the aspect of that entire game. So that was my number one takeaway from the Chiefs offense. Then you go to the other side. I think when you look at San Francisco, and I'm not the only one to talk about this guy, but just watching Deebo Samuel and just how he's been used over the really not just this past week in the Super Bowl, but you go to the playoff run, you go really to the second half of the season, all the things that Kyle Shanahan has been able to do with Deebo Samuel, a rookie, the 35th overall pick, I believe, out of South Carolina last year, early second-round pick. This is a guy that when you watched him in college, he had that ability to beat you in a lot of different ways, and we said it numerous times on the Journey to the Draft podcast, he was a wide receiver built like a running back, and when you look at how he's used in San Francisco, they give him the ball in those end arounds, on those gadgets. You see him as a blocker, you see him short passes, yards after catch. You saw one of the better releases and routes on just a quick slant, basic slant route that I've seen all season long, and it was a ho-hum. I think it was a 3rd and short. He converts it, they move the chains for a first down, but that kind of shows, hey, this guy's not just a gadget player. He's also a damn fine receiver as well. And then you see him running vertical routes. So I think that kind of versatility speaks to some of these players that I think a lot of teams now are looking for in the NFL. And I look at some of these guys that are coming out in this NFL draft, guys that we're talking about every single week over on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Laviska Shenault from Colorado, kind of built similarly, right? He's 6'2", 220 pounds. He's got a thick frame. He's great with the ball in his hands, yards after catch. Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State. We're talking about a lot about him this week on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I think when you look at some of these guys, these big-bodied wide receivers that are great with the ball in their hands. Maybe they're not as crafty as route runners. Maybe they're not great, tracking the deep ball over the shoulder, but get the ball in their hands and let them do work. It's going to be interesting to see how the NFL kind of evolves, because this is the time of year where everybody's looking at the teams that had lots of success and trying to point to different ways. Hey, how can we match what they did? How can we mirror some of the successes they had? Not everybody's going to be able to do it, but it's going to be interesting to see if they're able to find those kinds of players or convert what they've already got. If there's already players that are in your building that have that ability to be that kind of playmaker with the ball in their hands, certainly is going to be interesting to watch. Deebo Samuel had an outstanding game. To me, would have been one of the MVPs. One of the MVP candidates, I should say, for the San Francisco 49ers, had they been able to pull that out. Had an outstanding game there for San Francisco. All right. That'll do it. This was a fun show this week. Always great catching up with Charles Davis. Appreciate all of you. Thank you to the Scouts Doubt for a great question. As always, again, the best way to support the show, go on to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us that rating. Leave us that comment, and we will answer it here on the show. Until then, until next week, I appreciate everybody here for listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I'm Fran Duffy. We will talk to you next week.